Hey everybody, I'm Curtis with the Lofty and Scaler. Today we're going to look at planning and designing your layout. Today what I'm doing is I'm up here in my loft, and this is where the layout's going to be, my loft layout. It's going to be in scale, and it's going to start here on this surface, in this area here. And basically this is going to be home base. This is going to be the beginning of it before it actually starts going out around the loft. So I kind of want to measure the area that I have available to me. Now there's some considerations when you're designing a layout. In my previous layout I had some corner pieces that were 3 feet by 3 feet with a 24-inch piece connection on the end. So, but to reach the furthest back of the corner was very, very difficult for me to reach. And if I'm going to have another layer, let's say a deck that's maybe another 10 inches, 10 or 12 inches above this deck. So this deck is probably going to be 4 inches thick, and then another 10 inches, so it's going to be up to here. If that's the case, I'm going to be very limited to how far I can get back in here, unless I can easily flip up this other deck or something like that. And I don't even know that I'm going to have a second deck, but if I do, I want to plan ahead and think about it now before I actually do it. So if I have a layout and I'm going to put it in here, this is about the height I'm going to be working at. I'm not going to be standing up and bending over to manipulate this stuff. I'm going to be kneeling or sitting on a chair. And so reaching the back here is probably okay, but anything that's going to be close up front to my stomach here might be an issue. So I'll have to take that into consideration. The initial idea that I had in my mind was to have some diagonal passenger tracks coming in here so I can get a fairly long passenger line, and then just have city and scenery in the back here, and then maybe a loop underneath it for when the loop layout comes all the way around. That would actually be on the base, and then the layout would be 4 inches above that, and then that would come in from the other side and loop around underneath and go back. But that's just something I'm thinking about. I haven't really decided yet what I'm going to do. So the first thing I need to do is measure this space and then figure out how I'm going to put the layout in here. So this is a bit of an odd space, so when I measure it, it's only 29.5 inches deep, which is just shy of 30 inches. And then when I measure it this way, it should be, I think the last time I measured it was 80 something inches. So 81.5 inches. So it's 29.5 inches deep by 81.5 inches wide. So sort of odd measurements. And I have to think about what I'm going to do for a box. And I have to keep in mind that this whole layout is going to be removable. So if for some reason my basement becomes available, where my stepdaughter actually finds a place to live and moves out, and I can move it down to the basement, guess what? I'm going to pull it out of the loft and move it to the basement just for ease of use. I'm 52 years old now, but you know, when I'm in my 60s, do I really want to be coming up those loft stairs? I also kind of have to figure out what materials I'm going to use. Am I going to use a wood box? Am I going to use foam? Am I going to use what do you call it? Gator board. Gator board is an option. I have gator board. The fact that it's 81.5 inches long is an odd measurement, an odd size. Let me remeasure. Yeah, 81.5 inches. So it's not, it would have been nice if this had been 6 feet or 72 inches, something even, an even measurement, but it just didn't work out that way. So if I use a plywood base, let's say, I'm going to have to get a 4x8 sheet of plywood and cut it down to 81 inches, and then figure I'll have 1/4 inch wood sides to it, so that takes up 81.5 inches. So it should fit right in here. I do have some obstructions here. I've got a cable for cable TV coming in here. At the other end I have an air conditioner, a window air conditioner I put in here so I can keep the loft cool. I have it turned off right now because we're filming I have the electrical outlet there so I can power the layout. I have some other considerations too, where I can put the computer. Am I going to have a separate stand for that? Am I going to have a monitor for the track diagram? All different kinds of things to think about. Right now, though, is I want to create a box that's going to be that'll fit inside here, that'll support what I want to do and be sturdy enough to support everything, but I don't want to get it too heavy. So that's why I'm thinking maybe wood sides with foam interior, like 1-inch foam, and I'll have to support the foam across the top somehow too. So just all considerations that I'm thinking about at this time. So let's go back out of the loft and go to some pen and paper or pencil and paper and see what kind of ideas I can come up with. When we talk about planning a layout, a train layout, we have to determine several things. And the first thing we have to determine, and probably the most important thing to determine, is what scale do I want to model in. So there are popular scales. There's HO scale, and then there's N scale, there's O scale, and this is not in order. There's Z scale. There's many different scales, and each have their pluses and minuses. Probably one of the most popular scales to model is HO. The largest scale to model would probably be something like a 1 scale or LGB. Then would be O scale, and then you even have scales like TT and HON3 and NN3. It goes on and on and on. There's a scale for everybody. So kind of do your research, look on the web, look at people's layouts. Z scale, I considered Z scale, but Z scale is so tiny. I need glasses to read a book now, much less to be able to see the detail on those teeny tiny little cars. And it just seems Z scale, the things that were available for it, go through a Walthers catalog, the structures, the people, there just wasn't enough in there for me because I'm not a scratch builder per se. At least I haven't done it yet. I probably will before this series is over. But it's just, to me, a little bit too small for me to go. HO, I love HO. I grew up on HO scale. So I grew up on Markland, and Markland was a 3-rail AC HO system, beautiful equipment, no complaints with how it operated or anything like that, but it was European, and I really don't want to model a European railroad at this point. I don't know too much about the European system. I think the German trains, the models are exquisite. I think they're well engineered. They run flawlessly. I do have some N-scale European stuff that I'm going to be using on my layout, but it's like a hybrid. The story behind it will be that the railroad is testing these units for maybe purchasing them in bulk for later use. Get my drift? Okay. So once we determine what scale we're in, that gives us a better idea of how much space we need. And sometimes you may want to reverse engineer this. In other words, you may look at your space and then see what scale will fit into it. I would love to have an O scale layout. I truly would. O scale is big and just beautiful. The details are gorgeous in it. I don't have to squint to re-rail the stuff. But the problem is with O scale, I need a ton of space. I need a barn to put that stuff into. And I don't have a barn to put it into. So I just have my loft. So HO, I could have done HO in there, but remember my turn radiuses, as your scales get bigger, your turn radiuses get bigger as well. And so my turn radiuses, if I want to make a loop where it can loop back in on itself, would be basically virtually impossible to do in that loft area. I'd have to have at least, what's the minimum turn? HO people, 18 to 22 inches, 20 inches, something like that for a turn. So I'd have to have at least 36 inches or 3 feet to make one complete circle, which isn't bad, I guess. But, I've got so much invested in N scale right now. I'm kind of sticking with N scale. And I can have nice longer trains with N scale. Okay, so then the other consideration, after you figure out your scale and your space, is what kind of track do you want to use? Well, there's all kinds of track, too, for scales. There's pre-made sectional track that you can buy 8-inch piece, 9-inch piece, and they stick together. They have what's called flex track, which will come in anywhere from 30 to 36-inch pieces. And then you cut what you need, and then you can bend it how you want it and do it that way. Working with flex track, I can tell you there's a learning curve to it, but it's not impossible. If you have any interest in trying to learn, there's tons of videos on YouTube on how to do flex track. I might get into doing some flex track here and combining it with some other track. At that point, we can talk about flex track. And there's different kinds of flex track. There's Pico flex track, which is from the UK. There's Micro Engineering flex track, which is from the US. There is Atlas flex track, which is a US track. And they have different codes. So what is a code? Well, the rail on the actual track can be a different code. So like if it's a code 100, it's going to be a bigger rail, a thicker rail, maybe not as realistic rail that you would find on a railroad, all the way down to like a code 40, which would be very, very prototypical maybe for a siding. Code 55 would be something maybe you'd find on a main line. It's proportional. But there's drawbacks and bonuses to every track system. The code 100, although it looks kind of weird because the track is so thick, it's going to be much sturdier and more reliable in that you're not screwing up the track gauges when you're installing it and things like that. It's just a stiffer, sturdier rail. Whereas when you get down to the code 40 or code 55, perhaps the track can be finicky, and you have to be very careful on how you handle that track to make sure it's not damaged and not screwed up. My last layout was Pico code 55, and it worked really, really well, but it's the first time I'd ever laid flex track, and so I had some issues just because of that, of me laying flex track and switches for the first time. Then there's a track system, I don't know how to really describe it. When I started off in Markland, they had what they called a C-track. And so C-track was where the roadbed and the track was all molded in together. Now the C-track, the Markland stuff, was actually made out of tin. And so it was very, very loud. You can imagine having a hollow space under a tin roadbed. But it was very easy. It was plug and play. You just snap the two together, and it was indestructible. You couldn't destroy it. Now there's modern day versions of that. So there's Bachmann Easy Track, I think, and then there's a Kato Unitrack. And so Kato Unitrack is probably going to be one of your most diverse systems as far as plug and play snap track that you can have. It's going to be probably the most reliable and the easiest to work with in certain arenas. If you have a layout that's designed with a certain geometry, in other words, it have to have certain radiuses coming off of certain curves and things like that to make everything fit, Kato is a little harder to work with because you have to manipulate the track and modify the track to get it to fit. Whereas if you use flex track, you can flex it the way you want it and snip it where you want it and put it all together. So working with a snap track like a Kato Unitrack, you have to have a little bit more forethought into it than you would with a more complex geometry, with a complex geometry than you would with flex track. It's just some design considerations you have to think about. The good thing about like Unitrack, Kato Unitrack, is that the motors for the switches are actually in the switch in the roadbed itself. With flex track and sectional track, where you have the switches lying on cork, you'll have to rig, if you want a switch motor, you'll have to rig a mechanism underneath the layout to connect with it to throw those points. My last layout did that, and it worked really well, and it can be done fairly easily, but there are some headaches with it. Okay, so it's not going to be as easy as something like Kato Unitrack. For my layout, I've decided to go with Kato Unitrack. And the only reason why is because I have a ton of Atlas Code 55 flex track, Atlas Code 55 switches. I've got probably more brand new switches than I would use because I had planned a large layout before in my basement, which I can't use. And so I was going to use all code 55. Then I temporarily moved out of the area, then I moved back, and now I'm back. So right now, what I want to do is ease of use, ease of putting it together. I'm going to use the Kato Unitrack. And also, I don't want the switch motors to be underneath the layout. And the reason being is because I'm not going to have that much space. The layout is already going to be low enough to the floor, the shelves are, that I don't want to have to crawl on my back to get access to those switch motors. Now, you're going to say, well, what about wiring? Well, I'm going to build each section and wire each section before installing it. And I'll test it before I actually install it. So each section that I'm going to put in, I'll be able to unplug one plug at one end and one plug at the other and slide that section out and then put that section back in if I want and then plug it back in. It's only if I'm going to add something, like if I'm going to add a spur or something like that, then I'll have to slide the section, unplug it, take the section out, put the spur in, do all my landscaping, wire it all up from underneath where I can just flip it up and do whatever, and then I can slide it back in and plug it back in. And I'm doing this for ease of use and for ease of moving. I don't want anything to be permanent up in that loft. So where do we get ideas for our track plans? If we've never planned a railroad before, there is a ton of books out there. Model Railroader, Kalmbach Publishing. One of my favorite authors is Ian Rice. He has some really nice books on track planning, but they also have, all kinds of track planning here. Model Railroader. If you're a subscriber to Model Railroader, which I would definitely subscribe to, they have a library, electronic library of layouts. Now, when you go through these books, you may not find a layout that you like that you're going to use from head to toe. That's really not what these, you can do that. But I look at these books for inspiration and for ideas to incorporate into my own design that I want to do. So, maybe I like the way Ian Rice did a particular industry on the side, or maybe, like, for instance, I really like this whole side here where he has this industry. Well, I can incorporate just that one side into my layout on a shelf because this whole thing is for shelf layouts. And so it's just an idea to get ideas to incorporate into your layout. So, and then when we talk about designing a layout, if you're a computer person, there's computer softwares out there like Third Planet that are designed specifically for designing model railroads. I used to own Third Planet years and years and years and years ago. But honestly, some people just like to plan railroads in it's like a 3D CAD software, which is fine. That's great. I'm not so much that way. It's okay, but I spend so much time learning the CAD software. I'd rather just sketch something out on paper and see if I can get it to fit. And there's different ways to do that. Now, Kato, since I'm going to use Unitrack, Kato makes a stencil, and this is their stencil. It's plastic, and I probably have 4 of these things over the years because I'd lose it. I'd stick it in a magazine and lose it, right? And but they're really handy. It has all the radius, has all the pieces that they offer in here, and it gives you a good idea of when you put pencil to paper, how everything's going to fit. So it gives you a little on here. It tells you this is inches over here, but then it's inches in scale for their track. So in other words, and this is backwards here. So this here would be 12 inches on the layout, 14 inches, or 24 inches, 36, 48, 60, 72, and then I have marked over here 81 or so inches, 81 and a half inches. And so then I can get the proper dimensions. I can draw out the boundaries of my box and things like that. So, okay, so I think that's enough for this time. Next time I'm going to talk about what I actually decided to do for the actual box. Again, I wanted it lightweight, I wanted it sturdy, I wanted to be able to put a lower level in it for a loop for the other side of the layout. And then I'll kind of go over what my overall grand scheme for the railroad is, and then we'll go into the actual design of this first box or this first section. Okay, so thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you already haven't, and we'll see you next time.